Hello, Tidal Creek, and other folks out there that are watching this video devotional this morning. I hope you're well. Today is Monday, April the 6th, and Holy Week began yesterday. And last week, as this week was approaching, I talked with Amanda Dickman, our worship leader, and we both decided just to help you prepare for Easter, which, of course, I think we need to prepare for. It's such a significant day in our faith and our in the Christian year that we really wanted to do devotions every day. So you'll get a devotion with music from Amanda every day, and you'll get one from me as well. They won't always match, but there'll be things that help you focus and prepare for Easter. So today, I would like to talk to you about how the Holy Week began. It was the day that we celebrated yesterday as Palm Sunday, that we also call the triumphal entry. And I just wanted to just take a moment and kind of look at something that I think can really help us as we get started with this week. This passage today kind of lays the foundation for a lot of things that are happening. I think we can understand them a whole lot more with better depth if we really see the dynamics going on from the very beginning moment that Jesus enters Jerusalem. So in just a moment, I will read from Matthew 21, verses 1 through 11. But before I do, let me just set the stage as Jesus is about to enter Jerusalem. It says he's on the Mount of Olives. And this past fall, I got the chance to go to Israel and to the Holy Land, and I got to stand on the Mount of Olives where Jesus was before he made his trip into Jerusalem. In Jerusalem, the city is elevated, but the Mount of Olives is even higher. So as Jesus is about to make his triumphal entry, he's kind of coming down and then into Jerusalem. And so he's kind of overlooking the city before he goes in. And I also just want to tell you some of the dynamics at play, because as he's going to start into Jerusalem, he's coming there along with a lot of other Jewish people for the celebration of Passover. And really quickly, let me just share the connection between Passover and some of the expectations that the Jewish people had for Jesus. Passover had happened many years ago when Moses led the people of Israel out of Egypt, and they were in bondage there. And so for many years, they had just been treated as slaves. And the people of Egypt, especially the Pharaoh, had made it very difficult on them. And now they wanted to leave. And so I won't take you through the whole story, but finally, without any fight, without any weapons, the people of Israel were able to walk out of Egypt and out of their bondage. And Moses led the way. And the night before that all happened, the reason it's called Passover is the night before it all happened, what finally caused the Pharaoh to let them go was the death of the firstborn. And so that night, the Jewish people had put blood of a lamb on their doorpost, and the death angel passed over their home and went to the firstborn of many of the Egyptians. And of course, that brought great distress. And so finally, Pharaoh says, you can go. He had resisted, but he said, you go. Just please leave. Go. And Passover meant that night the death angel had passed over the families that were protected by the blood of the Lamb. So here we are. Jesus is about to go into Jerusalem, and they've gathered for Passover, remembering the time that the death angel passed over and Moses led them out of their slavery, and he led them out of that oppression. Now, the reason that's important is now as they're gathering in Jerusalem and Jesus is going in, now many, many years later, they're under Roman oppression. So they have in mind for Jesus to be this king who will deliver them, this Messiah that's been spoken about, that we'll read some scriptures in a second. He's been spoken about his coming for many years. Now he's coming, and they have expectations that he will be the son of David, like the military leader King David, who will overthrow the Roman occupation. That is the expectation going on here. And as this Passover feast is coming and this observance is going on, people are pouring into Jerusalem and fervor is high. The energy is high that something is about to happen. And now this king, this long-awaited king, is coming. So with that in mind, let's read Matthew 21, verses 1 through 11. As they approached Jerusalem, they, are Jesus and his disciples, as they approached Jerusalem and came to Bethphage on the Mount of Olives, Jesus sent two disciples, saying to them, "Go to the village ahead of you, and at once you will find a donkey tied there, with her colt by her. Untie them and bring them to me. If anyone says anything to you, say that the Lord needs them, and he will send them right away." This took place to fulfill what was spoken through the prophet. And by the way, that prophet is Zechariah. "Say to daughter Zion, see, your king comes to you, gentle and riding on a donkey, and on a colt, the foal of a donkey." The disciples went and did as Jesus had instructed them. They brought the donkey and the colt and placed their cloaks on them for Jesus to sit on. A very large crowd spread their cloaks on the road, and while others cut branches from the trees and spread them on the road. The crowds that went ahead of him and those that followed shouted, "Hosanna to the Son of David. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Hosanna in the highest heaven." When Jesus entered Jerusalem, the whole city was stirred, and they asked, "Who is this?" The crowds answered, "This is Jesus, the prophet from Nazareth in Galilee." So Jesus is kicking off what we call now Holy Week. That is not what they called it. That is what we call it, because we know he came in on a Sunday, and the next Sunday, which we celebrate as Easter, he will rise. But in this 1 week, so much happens. Now Jesus knows his death is coming. In fact, in chapter 20, if you want to go back, the chapter before I read today, he speaks of his coming death. He knows what lays before him. But on this day when he triumphantly enters Jerusalem, he is hailed as a king. And he'll run into trouble this week because he is not the kind of king that they longed for. He is more powerful, actually, than the king they had in mind, but he is not a military king. He will not throw off Roman oppression. He will be a different kind of king. In fact, he will be a different kind of ruler. He has taught the disciples that when you're a leader in this movement called Christianity, you lead differently. In fact, let me go back and read two passages. First, I want to remind you of what the people recognized in him out of Zechariah. And then I also want to read a passage out of Matthew. But let me start with Zechariah 9:9. Again, as Jesus is making his way, this is what the people have in mind. "Rejoice greatly, daughter Zion. Shout, daughter Jerusalem. See, your king comes to you, righteous and victorious, lowly and riding on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of a donkey." Now, before we judge the Jewish people too harshly, try to put yourself in their shoes. You're under another government's oppression. They are running the show. You are taxed more than you should be. There are other things, other liberties that are taken away. We can see why they longed for someone who would wipe that away. And so you can imagine as they look back and they remember this one will come. He will come riding on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of a donkey. And here is Jesus doing exactly that. So they put palm branches on the road. They lay their cloaks on the road, just as you would for a military king who is coming back from a conquest or who is about to have a conquest. Please understand that is what they had in mind. So they expect that kind of king. But just the chapter before, Jesus told us what kind of ruler he would be. He heard two of his disciples arguing about whether they would sit on his right and his left, and could they do that? And Jesus told them, they could not even drink the bitter cup that went along with that. They didn't understand what they were asking. It was only his Father's to give those places at his side. But he took that moment to remind them of what kind of leader he was. It was only a few nights later that he will wash their feet. And he will tell them to wash other people's feet. But even before so, listen to what he says about the way he leads. Listen to what he says about the way his people will lead. In verse 25 of Matthew 20, it says, Jesus called them, the disciples, together and said, "You know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their high officials exercise authority over them. Not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant. And whoever wants to be first must be your slave. Just as the Son of Man," don't miss, they're calling him Son of David. He's calling himself Son of Man. "Did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." Today, I just want to give us a couple simple focuses as we prepare for Holy Week. I wonder if in this passage we don't want to take a step back and take a look at two concepts: power and service. Do we really understand the kind of power that believers are called to have? See, they want him to be a political, military leader. They want him to give them what they want in governmental, political, kingdom terms. And he always says, mine is a different kind of kingdom. See, Jesus had all the power that he needed. He didn't need any government's power. He didn't need to align what he was doing with the government. He was calling people to follow his kind of power, his kind of leadership. I really do believe today, if I had to point to one thing that believers understand very differently, it's this whole concept of what kind of power we are to have. We so want to grab political power. We want many times to align ourselves with power that we think we need. When Jesus is teaching right here, he wasn't just teaching this to the people of Israel. I think he's saying this to all countries and all nations. I'm not about nationalism. I'm about setting people free from sin, from bitterness. I'm about grace and truth and life and love. I'm about serving. So he reminds them, I'm a different kind of leader. I'm not one that lords it over. I'm not asking for people who lord it over. And like I say, a few nights later, he'll give the disciples something they'll never forget. He washes their feet. He washes their feet. One of the last things he will do before he goes to the cross is he will wash his disciples' feet, and he will tell them to do the same. So I guess here's the question I want you to ponder today. How are you serving? How do you work out service, forgiveness, and other aspects that go with humility? How do you work those out with your faith? Today, I would ask you to really just think about the kind of leadership, the kind of kingdom that Jesus modeled. As we go through the week and we look more and more how Jesus has his interactions, we'll see that the people wanted him to be something very different. In fact, I think the people will kill him because he won't be the kind of leader that they want him to be. He will try to tell them he's about something different, and they won't hear it. But today, here's what I think we need to hear. How are we loving? How are we serving? How are we being reflection of this King of Kings and Lord of Lords who rode the colt of a donkey into Jerusalem? The one who had more power than anyone's ever held because he was a human being, even though he was fully God. He was the most powerful human being who's ever walked this planet, and he did things differently. Today, I would just ask, as you listen to this devotion today, I would ask you to really think about, who are you serving? Are you serving the Lord? Are you serving yourself? Are you serving your neighbor? More than any time in recent history, I would say we have great opportunities right now to serve one another. One of the ways, the very practical ways we can serve our medical community right now is just by staying home. Another thing we can do is we can start being sensitive to those around us right now, that because they're staying home, they're having hardships. They could be financial. They could be just things that they need, very practical things. But I believe the Lord is stripping away a lot of things right now that cause us to walk more closely with him. And at the heart of all questions is, how will I serve? How will you serve? Thank you for joining in to this first devotion. I'll bring one every day. We will post them on social media. I think we may post them on our website as well. And we thank you for entering into this journey and preparing yourself for Christ's crucifixion and ultimately his resurrection. Thank you so much for tuning in today. And as I always say, we love you. God bless you. Take care.